Christine's Corner. Stay and watch the show. You'll feed your heart and soul. Meeting people in the know. Christine's Corner. Christine's Corner. Christine's Corner.
Hi, welcome back to Christine's Corner. I'm so glad you came and joined us. Today, my special guest is Olena Lennon, correct? She is an adjunct professor of national security. I'm reading word for word what she wrote me. I apologize, I don't want to do plagiarism or anything here. So she's the professor of national security and political science at the University of New Haven, where she teaches such courses as the U.S. foreign and defense policy and international relations. Formerly a Fulbright scholar, good for you, from Ukraine, and most recently a scholar of Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Oh my. And she has dedicated her research to the study of conflict management and identity politics in Eastern Europe, focused on domestic and foreign policy of Ukraine. An Eastern Ukraine native, Dr. Lennon has been a regular participant in scholarly and media forums related to issues in Ukraine, facilitating a more informed and objective analysis of the ongoing Russian-Ukraine war. She also serves as an election observer with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I'm going to ask you what that is. And has completed several election observation missions in the region. Her work appeared, and I just lost it. I'm sorry.
It's not important.
It appeared National Interest, Eurasian Geography and Economics, and other outlets. Wow, that's quite a mouthful.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for writing that. And you do much for everyone. So what is observation? What is that?
Election observation.
Yes,
so Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is precisely what it stands for.
Okay.
It's one of very few remaining platforms where the Western community, Western countries participate alongside Russia in providing, engaging in various security initiatives. So where I come in is where I participate in election observation missions, where there's small teams of short-term and long-term observers deployed to a given area, country that requests international, independent international observers to make sure that elections are run transparently, fairly, and that there are no violations. So basically, OSCE is one of the more credible international organizations that will sort of provide their seal of approval, so to speak, to make sure that elections are run without any vielations. So I'm honored to be a part of those teams.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you came and she's going to be talking about, Ukraine and the war. She's also from Ukraine. So how does that affect you? Because you go there, you said you were just there. I guess there's two questions. How is it going there now, over a year now? And how are you doing with this, as well as being in Ukraine?
Right. Well, thank you so much for shining light on this issue, because the war has been going on for a very long time, even though it keeps escalating, and obviously now what we have seen in the last year has been the most brutal, the most sort of devastating war that we've seen on the entire continent since World War II. But I want to emphasize that, for me personally, the war started in 2014. That was the first invasion of Ukraine when Russia invaded annexed Crimea, which is sovereign territory of Ukraine, and also supported the so-called separatist movement by these Russian proxy forces that created these sort of enclaves, self-proclaimed republics on the sovereign territory of Ukraine, and denying Ukraine, its territorial integrity. So, long story short, this has gone on for 9 years. I just kind of want to emphasize that Ukraine's struggle with Russian aggression has not been limited to the past year, and people have been affected by this, especially in eastern Ukraine. But now the entire Ukraine is just completely overwhelmed with the war. So, but answering your question, how people are doing, I was just there a few days ago. On the one hand, obviously, the war has been just absolutely devastating, and even though most egregious fighting is concentrated in the east of Ukraine, particularly around the town of Bakhmut, that has been on the news. It's been the most grinding artillery, heavy equipment involved warfare. But that said, it doesn't mean that the rest of Ukraine is business as usual, because Russia continues to leverage airstrikes across the entirety of Ukraine. And even though Ukrainian air defenses have become much better at intercepting those missiles and drones, some still land, and some missiles hit residential areas, shopping malls. Just recently, a residential building, was just a couple of days before I got there, a residential building right outside the capital city of Kiev in the town called Uman was hit with a Russian missile that failed to be intercepted, and a lot of people were killed. Civilians outside, a war zone. So
that's awful and inhumane. That they're attacking civilians, their homes. Even babies, maternity wards. Everywhere. Yeah,
absolutely. And that what makes this war particularly brutal and devastating is that it's not just a war the Russian military is not just fighting the Ukrainian military.
Yeah.
It's not just a state-on-state contest war, but it's also a war against Ukrainian civilians. And these are punitive attacks. They serve the purpose of not just degrading the Ukrainian state, but also demoralizing people, breaking their will to fight, breaking morale, and discrediting the Zelensky administration's policy and the war effort. So on the one hand, obviously that the devastation is unthinkable. But on the other hand, I do want to emphasize, even though as hard as it may be to find a silver lining in the tragedy of those proportions, it's amazing to see the level of humanity and unity in Ukraine, with the way people rose to the occasion and helping the war effort, but helping one another. It's just truly incredible to see that resilience, that no matter how long and how much the Russian government has been trying to degrade the Ukrainian state, its economy, its civilian infrastructure. Ukrainians are very creative. They improvise, and they persist.
Very strong and persist, as you say, and they're just still not breaking their spirit. It just seems to be empowering them even more to help anyone that's in harm's way. And I don't know how they are surviving, even though I know you said they're resilient and they creative and staying alive. But how can you? Everything's destroyed. So it's where do you go? How do you get food? How do you get water?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I think has really helped Ukrainians, obviously there is an enormous outpouring of support from Western community, a lot of international organizations, non-governmental organizations, but also government aid that has been provided to Ukraine, and that has obviously been very helpful. But the Ukrainian government is also amazing how quickly they rebuild things, fix things, every time, especially last fall when the Russians leveraged airstrikes against civilian infrastructure, particularly a power grid. And the idea was to, deny Ukrainians access to electricity and water going into the winter, again, to disempower Ukrainians and to, again, break morale and weaken the Ukrainian state. But, one thing that really helped was that, it was not a very cold winter, and Ukrainians, actually, a lot of Ukrainians invested in generators. So they power up their houses. They had found ways to supply energy using alternative sources. But again, it's not to undermine, not to downplay, not to make light of the situation. No, obviously, yes. It has been very hard, but and there's a lot of internally displaced people that had been forced to relocate inside and outside Ukraine. So it's been difficult. But I have to say that the Ukrainian government has been not just kind of active on the battlefield, but also not overlooking the civilian side of running a country, right? So they continue, every time buildings get destroyed, they deploy teams on the scene to rebuild, reconstruct, to fix things. So it's a viable state, and I think that's one of the messages that they're trying to get across, is that no matter how much Russia tries to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure and way of life, they will persist, they will rebuild, and they will keep going because they have nowhere to go. I think one of the things that makes this war hard to understand sometimes for us here in America is that why don't people leave, right? So why don't they find a safer place?
Well, many have, but you can't.
There's nowhere. They may not have a choice. Ukrainians have no other. A lot of Ukrainians have no other place to live, and so they have no choice but defend their territory and deny Russia an opportunity to dig in, entrench, and restrike, once an opportunity presents itself. So it is a war of attrition, but it's also an existential fight, because Ukrainians feel as though they are not just fighting for the control of those territories, they're fighting for their survival. And I think that's really what makes this war particularly a defining moment of the century, in my opinion, not just in Ukraine, but globally, because it's a struggle of two value systems that are seemingly irreconcilable. Ukraine has embraced Western-style democracy, while Russia, persists with its imperialistic ambitions and tries to control Ukraine and kind of force Ukraine to go back to entirely under Russia's control. So we're seeing a generational fight that is going to define future generations, not just in Ukraine but in the United States as well.
That's amazing. I didn't know they were trying to. They are rebuilding at the same time. I was like, well, wow, never would I think of that. And it's like, they're just amazing people. I know that we have a lot in the United States, probably all over the world now, because a lot of them had to go many places. But I know Biden has given them a lot of money, so I hope what they've given them is helping not just for the war's sake, but the people too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the United States is one of the largest providers of military aid and humanitarian aid. Obviously the United States, has been the lifeline for the war effort, as they have given, the U.S. government has given a lot of equipment and munitions. But I have to say, too, that the United States also has the capacity to provide that level of military aid, because when you look at burden sharing between the European countries and the United States, the Europeans are bearing the brunt of the burden when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, and various social needs that they have, those who have resettled in neighboring countries. But as far as the American support is concerned, I think it's not just aid for Ukraine, and it hasn't really been, even though it has been the largest amount the United States has ever given of sort of record proportions, but it hasn't necessarily come out of any of our own defense needs. A lot of the aid provided to Ukraine has been given by way of the presidential drawdown, which basically means that these capabilities have come out of American stockpiles, so they haven't necessarily been produced for Ukraine. It's just the stuff that we already had, that the United States had the power to, the president had the power to transfer to Ukraine without asking for congressional approval. So it hasn't necessarily, dented our own defense capabilities. So that said, I think that the United States has so far provided at scale, but probably not fast enough. And then this is kind of where I think the conversation is now, is whether the United States and Western partners can resupply the Ukrainian military to not only launch this counteroffensive that everybody's anticipating, but also to hold the line and to make sure that the Russians don't go any further. So, but I have to, what I want to emphasize is that, in my opinion, I think in the opinion of many experts, this level of military aid, economic aid, humanitarian aid from the United States and Western partners is not just aid to Ukraine, but it's an investment. It's an investment into European security and global security. The United States absolutely benefits from this relationship with Ukraine, because Ukraine is fighting on behalf of Western democracies in defense of a value system that the United States is based on, and then that the United States promotes. So again, in that way, I hope that this partnership will continue, because it is mutually beneficial. Of course, for Ukraine, it's absolutely existential. They rely almost 100% on American aid, and not just currently, but also continuous aid going forward, because the war is not going to end anytime soon. And even if it de-escalates and the lines are frozen, it's possible that there's not going to be a ceasefire or peace agreement in the foreseeable future. So the United States sort of is committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as necessary. We don't know what that will entail necessarily, but I think on the American side, it has been the right approach, and it has been the right investment, but things could be delivered a little bit faster to actually be instrumental on the battlefield.
Is that because they're being I was going to say hammered, but so many bombs and everything are being thrown at them constantly, all the time. So there's not that. Is that what you're saying? They're not getting enough money to fix everything, or to have people have their soldiers fight back, or they're just the United States slow giving them the money?
Right. It's all of those things. It's the type of warfare it is. It truly is a war of attrition and an artillery duel in a way. This is kind of how Russia fights. Russia leverages firepower. It's a grinding war where thousands of missiles and munitions are expended every day. That is one aspect as to why the Ukraine is in need of not just more advanced weaponry, but also more munitions, more missiles, more tanks, more infantry fighting vehicles. So drones, drones are absolutely decisive. So quantity is its own quality, but you also have to realize that Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe, and the front line runs about 600 miles. So it's a very long front line. So Ukrainians are stretched thin. But I think that's also, but they have exceeded expectations by far in terms of not just defending that front line, but also liberating occupied territories of the in the last few months. So, you know, in seeing that level of performance and seeing that level of professionalism on the part of the Ukrainian military, I think the Western community, you know, sees the real potential and opportunity for the Ukrainians to continue liberating occupied territories, but they you know, they need both, you know, offensive and defensive capabilities, and the needs are so vast, because we're talking about not only defending the front line but also launching counteroffensives and liberating territories. So that obviously involves various types of equipment, you know, and nothing short of a combined arms operations that will require air support, infantry, reconnaissance, intelligence, and so the needs are so vast that it's really hard to, you know, tease out the, you know, kind of focus on that one aspect. There's no silver bullet, you know, no one capability, right. No, all of those.
And we're not sure or positive or with our help how fast this war can be over with either. You don't know how long it'll escalate, how much you need. So that's pretty sad. And I know they showed also that the Russian people, that they don't want the war themselves. For Ukraine, I think there's also Ukraine in Russia. So, and
the people are the ultimate victims, and I think the Russian people have also been victimized by this, but. It is absolutely Putin's war in terms of, you know, he's the mastermind behind it, but unfortunately the Russian people and the Russian society will, you know, bear the consequences of this, and this is also their legacy. However this ends, you know, it does assume some level of, you know, collective responsibility, even though this has been, for the most part, been a project that Putin has been obsessed with, you know, given his abuse of power and given the fact that he's just been in power for so long that he just funded.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but you also had mentioned how he's taking the Ukraine children and bringing them to Russia and changing everything about them, their name and everything.
Well, that's genocide by definition, right?
Yeah.
That's you know, I think that was one of the just remarkable, I think, events too, that the International Criminal Court indicted Putin and one of his officials of war crimes because forcefully transferring children and changing their identity in wartime, in particular, it does constitute genocide. In fact, so we have an indicted war criminal in power that, you know, a president of a country that's permanent member of the UN National Security Council. So that has not happened before. It's unprecedented. So I think that if we think about these developments in these sort of in this context of how unprecedented this war is and how unprecedented these types of war crimes are, then I think that then it becomes obvious that the war is not limited to Ukraine, that it's a global event. That will change the security architecture in Europe, but it will hopefully also force us and force the international community to rewrite the rules and norms of the international laws to make sure that wars of aggression of this type can be deterred in the future. You know, we failed to prevent this war as an international community, so I think it is incumbent upon us to not. To use this as an opportunity to, you know, help Ukraine, but also make sure that we make all the right changes to make war of aggression illegal and, most importantly, punishable by law.
It seems that Putin should be punishable, and thrown in prison or whatever they would do to him for everything that he's done so far. I mean. And just civilization, the people themselves, the children, what he's done, changed, you know, everything. That should be a crime right there. How does the leader of the whole world, or not the whole world, I'm sorry, We don't want
Hopeful
that
end.
of a country be allowed to do that. It's like Hitler again. So
People make those analogies with Hitler. I think those are very different scenarios. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Putin is an indicted war criminal, and that's just one of crimes that the International Criminal Court was able to put forward. There's a lot more. But again, that said, hopefully we can use this tragedy as an opportunity to rethink how we prevent this in the future, to make sure, because it's what the Ukrainian war has shown is that once it starts, it really kind of acquires a logic and inertia of its own, and the best way to win such wars in the future is to prevent them.
all right, thank you so much. We've gone over, but it's worth it. What you have brought to my show is absolutely fantastic. Well, it's not fantastic news, but thank you for informing our audience. I hope that helps you in any way. Thank you so much for coming. Anytime you want to come back and tell us what happened, how they're doing, and we're all rooting for them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And thank you for joining us. Love you.
Riverview Apartments is Bristol's two-time beautification award-winning residence community for adults age 55 and older. They offer 1 or 2 bedroom apartments with modern appliances, air conditioning, wall-to-wall carpet, and tiled floors. Both heat and hot water are included. Riverview also offers a wide range of activity rooms that include a billiard parlor and a spacious community room. It is handicap accessible with safe, secure parking for tenants and ample off-street parking for visitors. 860-940-6757 or riverviewbristol.com.